The sky above London was heavy and grey. Across the city, the mournful toll of bells carried through the air. A nation was in mourning. King Edward VII, the beloved peacemaker king, was dead. And in that moment of silence, as the empire bowed its head, another figure stepped forward to bear the crown. Not a man of flamboyance or charm like his father, but one of duty, restraint, and quiet strength. He was George V, son of Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, the sailor prince who never expected to rule, yet would soon carry the weight of an empire that spanned the world. On the 6th of May, 1910, George was proclaimed King of the United Kingdom and Emperor of India. As the crown was placed upon his head, he felt the gravity of generations, the unspoken burden of kingship. He was no longer the Duke of York, nor the sun in his father's shadow. He was now the sovereign of an empire where the sun never set, and soon, the world itself would test his every conviction. Years earlier, George had married Princess Mary of Teck, the woman once engaged to his late elder brother, Prince Albert Victor. It was a union arranged out of royal duty, but in time, it became something far deeper, a partnership built on loyalty, steadiness, and shared devotion to service. Mary was not a queen of vanity or extravagance. She was intelligent, composed, and anchored by a strong moral compass. Her presence gave George the balance his temperament required, a calm to his sense of responsibility. To those who knew them closely, their marriage was simple yet unbreakable, a model of the quiet dignity George would later embody as king. His relationship with his father, however, was more complex. Edward VII, once the charismatic Prince of Wales, had lived a life of indulgence and diplomacy. He was worldly, social, and adored the company of Europe's elite. George, on the other hand, was a man of simpler habits, methodical, punctual, deeply devoted to family and naval discipline. Their differences often clashed. Edward had doubted whether his serious-minded son could ever charm the people as he had. But George would prove that kingship was not built on charm, it was built on endurance. When his father died, George vowed silently that he would be a different kind of king. Not the dazzling figure of high society, but the steadfast guardian of the nation. The Britain George inherited was no longer the same empire that had crowned Queen Victoria half a century earlier. Industrial power had transformed the land, and with it came unrest. In the factories of Manchester and the docks of Liverpool, the working class demanded fair wages and dignity. The labour movement was rising, and strikes spread across the country like wildfire. At the same time, a different voice echoed through the streets, the cries of women demanding the right to vote. The suffragettes, led by figures such as Emmeline Pankhurst, challenged tradition and defied imprisonment for the sake of equality. For the first time, the monarchy faced a society that was not content to bow, a society that demanded progress. George, though cautious and conservative by nature, understood the need for balance. He did not oppose change, he sought to temper it, to ensure it did not tear the kingdom apart. His letters during these years reveal a man burdened by concern, yet unwavering in duty. He wrote, "The crown must be above politics, yet it must feel the pulse of the people." Among the storms that threatened his reign, none loomed larger than Ireland. For decades, Ireland had struggled for home rule, the right to govern its own affairs while remaining part of the United Kingdom. But the question of home rule split the nation in two. In the north, Ulster's Protestants, led by Edward Carson, vowed to resist any separation from Britain even by force. In the south, Irish nationalists, mostly Catholic, demanded autonomy or nothing at all. By 1913, the crisis had reached its breaking point. Paramilitary groups were forming. Weapons were being smuggled. And civil war seemed only months away. In this chaos, King George V did what few expected, he intervened. He summoned the leaders of both sides to Buckingham Palace in July 1914, hoping to find common ground. For 3 tense days, the palace became the heart of negotiation. But the divisions ran too deep. When the talks failed, George emerged solemn but resolute. He had not healed Ireland, but he had shown Britain and the world that a king could still stand for unity and reason. That act alone restored faith in the monarchy. The people saw in George not a distant figurehead, but a man willing to confront the impossible. While Britain wrestled with its own identity, across the Channel, Europe trembled under an uneasy peace. The great powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, all watched one another with suspicion. Military alliances formed like storm clouds, the Triple Entente against the Triple Alliance. And at the heart of this geopolitical web stood three men, bound by blood, divided by ambition. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II, George's first cousin, fiery, proud, and unpredictable. He longed for Germany's place in the sun, and his aggressive policies pushed Europe closer to conflict. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II, another cousin and dear friend of George. The two monarchs, nearly identical in appearance, shared a deep personal affection, addressing each other in letters as Nicky and Georgie. Yet, both were trapped in the machinery of empires too vast to control. George watched these cousins, one driven by ego, the other by desperation, and sensed the inevitable. He once remarked privately to an aide, "If only we could speak as family, not as kings, there might still be peace." But diplomacy had become a game of power, not kinship. And when the wheels of empire began to turn, even blood could not stop the march toward war. By 1914, Britain stood at a crossroads. At home, the Irish crisis simmered. A broad tension between Austria and Serbia threatened to ignite Europe. Then, on the 28th of June, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated. The news reached King George while he was at Windsor. At first, he believed it would pass, as so many European disputes had before. But this time, the machinery of alliances clicked into motion, cold, unstoppable. Within weeks, Austria declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized in response. Germany, bound by treaty, struck against Russia and then against France. And when German troops marched through neutral Belgium, the fate of Britain was sealed. On the 4th of August, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. That night, King George V stood in his study at Buckingham Palace. The lamps were dim, the air thick with silence. On his desk lay the final papers, the declaration of war. He read the words carefully, knowing each line would send millions into battle. His hand trembled for only a moment before he signed. It was the heaviest signature of his life. Outside, the crowds gathered, singing, shouting, praying. Many did not understand the magnitude of what had begun. But George did. He turned to Queen Mary and whispered, "We have entered the gravest trial in our history. May God protect our people." When dawn broke the next morning, the empire was at war. From India to Canada, from Australia to Africa, men answered the call to arms. The streets of London were filled with flags and marching bands, but beneath the excitement lay fear. King George V appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The crowd roared, thousands strong, waving, cheering, crying. He raised his hand, not in triumph, but in solemn unity. For he knew that what began as pride would soon turn into suffering. The Great War had begun. And with it, a century of innocence had ended. For George, it was not merely a war of nations. It was a war that would test his family, his faith, and the very idea of monarchy itself. He would see empires fall, including those ruled by his own cousins. But on that August morning, as the echoes of cheering mixed with the toll of church bells, he vowed silently, "Whatever the storm may bring, I shall stand with my people until the end." The world was changing. Kings and emperors who had once ruled by divine right would soon face the judgment of fire and steel. And at the heart of it all stood one man, King George V. In the next chapter, we will follow his journey through the trenches of diplomacy, his struggle to hold the empire together, and the choices that would determine not just victory, but the very future of Europe. This is the story of a king in the storm. And the storm has only just begun. Thank you for watching.